The freebie debate has been an ongoing one, with the Supreme Court now listening to different sides of the argument that freebies, which are essentially promises made by political parties before elections and by ruling governments before elections, can be detrimental and harmful to the economy. Now, many experts have weighed in on this over the last few weeks, and one of them is Ashima Goyal. She's a member of the RBI's MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, and a noted economist. And we're speaking with her now to know her take and her views on the freebie debate. Ms. Goyal, thank you so much for speaking with us here on ET Now. Now, over the weekend, you had some very interesting comments which were doing the rounds, in which you say that freebies aren't free. And of course, that's apparent because that's why they're called freebies. But can you elaborate on that thought? What, according to you, is the cost of freebies?
Yeah, freebies, anything you produce has a cost, right? So even if an item is given free to some person, there will be a cost which will be borne somewhere else in the system. For example, just for financing, there will be some other tax incurred or money raised in some other way which you don't know. And what are the implications of that? That is just on the financing side. Then, because it's distorting prices, then that leads to distortions in both production and consumption decisions and the misuse of resources. Then, financing also, you are spending less on things that could be more productive. So all these are indirect costs that are hidden, And the very parties that are getting the freebie might be suffering from these indirect costs. For example, poor people, the government is spending more on this kind of, way of using their finances, then they're spending less on education and health, which is absolutely essential for the poorer person to be able to work and to have a healthy life and a productive life.
But what about the argument that it is the job of the government to provide for those who don't have the means, and the concept of freebies comes actually from there? If the government doesn't provide, who will?
Yes, the government, but we have to look at the government. That's why I use the phrase Santa Claus. The government doesn't have unlimited resources. So the government should provide for those who do not have, but in ways that are sustainable. So therefore, you have to think how you are using the money. And freebies, we talk of merit goods and non-merit goods. So merit goods you need to spend on, and these are goods where there are externalities which help people, participate in the economy. But other goods are sometimes it's just sheer bribery, or it's distorting prices. And I think that is a very, very important issue for India because, you get stuck in history. And because of the oil shocks and our dependence on oil, there were all sorts of distortions in prices after the 70s oil shocks. And we see a tremendous fall in the quality of provision of public goods because of that. So, and people have come to expect this kind of distortion, but now we have moved to a market economy. And these need to be strengthened. And price setting should be with the regulators, not in arbitrary ways that distort resources.
Well, coming back to the basic question, in your view, how do you define a freebie? Who decides what's a good freebie and a bad freebie?
A freebie definition is any public good or service that is provided at less than that is provided at a price that does not cover its cost.
So, for example, how do you differentiate between, say, health and education as a cost and free electricity as a cost? Would you argue that both are equally important? Because some would definitely say that both are equally important.
So I would like to answer this by pointing to history, that because of the way political interventions have taken place in India, a lot of the so-called the goods made, whatever is made available to help the poor, comes through distorting prices. And that is not compatible with the market economy today. It's not compatible with our WTO agreements. I don't think courts can intervene in policy. It has to be voter awareness. That is why I have suggested that some of these indirect costs should be made clear when any such schemes are announced. Then in time, we might be able to, and we also have the technology for direct benefit transfers now. And then we have to move to a regime of more transparency on even at the state level on what they are spending on. And all this is part of that a party promises something, a state government implements some schemes, they must show how it is financed.
You know, on the overall argument that people make, and this comes up in the discussion around freebies, that if we continue this way, we will go down the Sri Lanka route. Look at how many freebies that they gave. Do you think that there is any merit to that argument?
Well, the merit is that no government can spend without taxing, right? Too much, cannot spend too much. There are limits to how much deficit you can have. And if you are a developing economy, then markets are not so willing to finance you. So India's government, central government, almost half their revenue goes in interest payments. So therefore, when people expect all kinds of benefits from the government, they have to be aware of this, that there are limits on what can be given. So it's the same thing that I was saying earlier, that your resources are limited. You have to use them in the best possible ways to achieve your target. So if your target is to help people, if you spend on infrastructure, on electricity, on production, on health, education, benefit people more. While if you distort prices, that leads to a lot of indirect costs that reduces growth and therefore keeps the economy backward, as India has been kept backward for so many years.
Now, while I have you here, ma'am, I have to ask you about what you make of our inflation problem. Do you think the worst of inflation fears are now behind us?
It would seem so. Inflation has been falling in the past few months. And oil prices, we are very dependent on oil imports, and they also seem to be softening. So and I think the public, again, this is an awareness issue, which is why I try to write or talk about this as an MPC member, that in an inflation targeting regime, the authorities are bound to respond if inflation is high. So, like in the past, where inflation reached double digits and it sustained for many years, that sort of thing cannot happen, because there will be strong action if inflation exceeds the tolerance bands. And this action can impose a cost. But if the public realizes that our inflation target is 4%, and all rental contracts, wage contracts, the kind of pricing that is done through the MSP, the pricing that electricity regulators set once these regulators are functional, all keep this target in mind. Yeah? Then you reach that, without having to squeeze output growth or raise interest rates. So this sort of understanding of an inflation targeting regime, and the role of the target in anchoring expectations is very important.
Well, thank you so much, Ashima Goyal, for speaking with us today on the show.